Five Nights at Freddy's is a horror game franchise made by a guy called Scott Cawthon back in 2014. In this video, I'll be describing the games, ranking them, and talking about them with my friends to find out which game is truly the best. Now, without any further ado, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the sexy bell, and we'll get right into the video. This video will also only go over the first 6 games in Ultimate Custom Night, the original franchise. If I had to describe the gameplay of Five Nights at Freddy's 1 in a single word, it would be claustrophobia. You're locked in a single room, and monsters are slowly approaching you. You have minimal ways to stop them, but you also have to make sure the power doesn't get out, or else the animatronics are just going to kill you then and there. It sets up the suspense-filled gameplay of the future entries really well, while also feeling unique compared to the others, because even though all of them share basic mechanics, and a lot of them take inspiration from FNaF 1, FNaF 1's cramped, few animatronics style gameplay really exudes something from the formula. Is it the best game? Probably not, but I'd say it's above decent. It's definitely one of the better games in the franchise, simply because it's amazing. Now granted, I'm not one of the crazy people that are like, FNaF 1's the best game. It's not by any means, because the other ones provide so much more to this formula, but being a bare bones basic makes it above a mid game. Granted, it is a very bare bones approach to the formula, which means it also has a very bare bones approach to the lore, which will be soon abandoned in the second entry. Now granted, it doesn't have nothing. For example, Phone Guy tells us about this mysterious event called the Bite of 87, which we're gonna talk about later. Oh boy. But it tells us about the Bite of 87, and how it occurred some point in the year 1987, something involving an animatronic presumably biting someone. Phony Guy also dies on Night 4, so I'd say that's a pretty substantial bit of lore for the franchise, just a little extra death to add to the tally, you know? And we also learn about something called the Missing Children's Incident, where it's inferred the kids are killed. There's no hard evidence saying the kids were murdered here, when, and how, but them going missing and the animatronics seeming haunted gives the player a pretty good idea of, oh, haunted robots haunted by dead kids. Great. This really bare bones approach to the lore, however, really allows people to get into the franchise, such as my friends, Zach and Riley, who I recently got into the franchise, and they have a pretty easy understanding of the lore, none of the more complex stuff introduced in later games, but they at least know the basic stuff from the first 3, which I feel is a really important thing that this game does. It's an easy entry point for people into the convoluted and complex story that it eventually becomes. Now, of course, here's those friends that I've been talking about all video and how they feel about FNaF 1 before we get into FNaF 2.
Okay, my mom screeched at me, I'm back now.
Okay, so...
It's an overstatement, she didn't yell.
Hola, soy Nora. Vámonos, dudes.
So you guys know FNaF 1, right? The classic, the original,
Nope.
the 20...
No, you're probably gonna have to buy it for me on Steam. I might want to play it sometime.
I hate you. Anyway,
Yay.
back to... So, you know Five Nights at Freddy's 1, right? You got the doors, you got the lights, you got the Freddy, the other
Common
Freddy.
appliances in a house. I always have my Freddy on me. I keep that thing on me. Anyway.
I heard
It's-
door instead of doors, and I thought you were talking about Zach.
I am in FNaF. The door, but it's a PNG of me.
So, you have the door functionality, you have limited power, you have the lights, and our recent 420 champion, Riley, aka One Gunner 57. So could you describe to us what 420 mode is like?
You're doxing him. What are you doing to this man? You could casually say something and be like, anyway, this is my friend's IP address.
Riley, talk about 420. What's it like?
Hell. Listen, it was fun, except for when it wasn't.
It's like starting a conversation at the beginning of history and going, alright, now we're in the 2020s.
Oh, okay.
It's jumping right into the deep end.
Night 4 is one of the most lore-filled nights. You know, you're casually going about your way, and then Phone Guy gets fucking killed.
Ooh.
What?
FNaF 1 doesn't really have much lore. It's just the
I
kids are
think
dead, they
Freddy
haunt the robots.
Is Freddy. I think he's a bear.
You're so smart.
You're doing great, sweetie.
I thought he was a dog.
Alright, FNaF 2, everybody.
FNaF 2 takes the bare bones approach of FNaF 1 and evolves it. It gets rid of your doors, makes the room a bit bigger, but also makes it that there are twice as many threats to fit in those hallways, and twice as many scary monster PNGs to scare you in the face. It also introduces a later staple of the series being the ventilation. The animatronics can just get on all fours and crawl through these things to get into your office, which is very, very uncomfortable. It makes it feel like the opposite of Five Nights at Freddy's 1. You're in a big room, and you have no way to defend yourself. Obviously still relying on power of some kind through the flashlight, but also making it so that you feel less cramped and more anxious the whole time, because it's a larger place with more animatronics, and there are more ways for them to get to you, and there are more things to worry about, like Foxy not having any weakness to the mask that you use to ward off every other animatronic, and you needing to flash him as many times as humanly possible just to get him out of your hallway. Now, this game also introduces another staple of the series, this game being a lot of people's favorites and top of their list simply because of the amount of stuff it adds and the amount of nostalgia they'd have for it. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 introduces the post-night minigames, which are also a thing in the next entry in the franchise, but we'll talk about those when they come up next. You see, these don't appear post-night when you get through safely, they appear randomly when you die, which isn't always the greatest, but they come with little bits of lore that allow the story to expand without it being based on mysterious things randomly appearing completely by chance in the hallways or whatever. And these minigames introduce what is quite possibly the most important character in the entire franchise, the purple guy. Now, of course, this guy isn't literally purple. He's just colored differently to make it so that he looks dark and mysterious without it having to be black in an already mostly black style of minigame. Although I feel like the multiple layers of magenta that this murdering monster marauds in make him mysteriously more mysterious in origin. Now, of course, this game sets up a lot of stuff about Purple Guy that would later be more delivered on in Five Nights at Freddy's 3 and later entries. But before we talk about Five Nights at Freddy's 3, the game that really expanded on who this murderer was, we need to talk about my friends who are cool about the lore and later the timeline. I'm not doing well at this. FNaF 2, right? You have your events, you have your twice the main cast plus a few, right? You have Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Fox.
Aren't they toys?
No, Willow, there's two sets of animatronics in FNaF 2.
Wait, no, like, genuinely, I thought it was just, they got all
No,
the-
There's two sets.
There's toys and there's
Why is there
withered.
two sets?
Because it's hard.
There's the old ones and the new ones. There's the
But
withered ones
I've only
and the
seen
toy
Withered
ones.
Bonnie.
You haven't seen Toy Bonnie?
No, I have. I mean, I've only seen Withered Bonnie out of the original set, you dumbo.
What?
Ugh.
And then we have the toy animatronics, which are
Oh,
Toy
the
Freddy.
animatronics are supposed to be the original. Oh.
You
Well, actually, that brings me to a great thing, Zach. So, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 takes place before FNaF 1.
How the fuck?
It takes place in 1987. We know this, A, because the phone guy's alive.
Might have 87.
We'll get into that in a minute.
87 and 83 in a math problem. And freaking shit.
Okay.
Wait. I have a question.
What, Willow?
If the bite of 87, like, happened around the time of FNaF 2, right? Why was...
Hello.
Which one was that? When did the kid's head get bit off?
That's a completely unrelated thing. But yeah, so there's the toy animatronics, right? And they're toys. We got Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, fucking Mangle.
Saying the toy animatronics are like toys is like Zach saying Freddy Fazbear is a bear.
Wait, but aren't they like full-size animatronics though?
Yeah.
Oh!
Why did you say that, Riley?
His choco milk.
No, I didn't. I shot my Nerf gun, it hit my TV and bounced into my bowl.
Why are you being stupid? Anyway, what? Zach, what were you saying?
FNaF 3, am I right?
No, we're not done with FNaF 2.
You idiot.
So, the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline as of Five Nights at Freddy's 2 takes place like this. Sometime in 1985, the first Freddy's location opens. It's the one from the first game, though it is not from the same time. And around this time in 1985, the missing children's incident happens, with Purple Guy killing at least 5 to 6 kids. That location is shut down because of it, and later in 1997, a new Freddy's location opens, and FNaF 2 ensues with the Bite of 87 happening sometime during or after Night 5, and the location is shut down by a mix of that and the missing children incident being reignited after they find the kids' corpses in the withered animatronic suits. Later, in around the year 2003, Phone Guy is killed while recording your Night 4 phone call, and later the gameplay of FNaF 1 takes place. So, later that same year, Five Nights at Freddy's 3 hit Steam, and people were excited to say the least. I mean, we have an antagonist now, we have a reason for the game to take place, and let me tell you, the hype of when Five Nights at Freddy's 3 came out was unreal. I mean, I've grown up with these games, and I can vividly remember how all of the analysis of the teasers and everything all culminated. Is it culminated or cumulated? Whatever. It all formed this hype around the game that was 100% met. Springtrap is arguably one of the best slasher horror designs in the world, and probably in human history. There are a few characters, I think, that can emulate this dread and fear the way Springtrap does, which is ultimately kind of shit, you know, because of the poor jump scare. But in later entries, like, Springtrap is the most memorable design from the franchise. Like, I don't think that bad. Like, but aside from the FNaF 1 animatronics, it is the most memorable design. When many people think of Five Nights at Freddy's, they think of Springtrap simply because he's the main antagonist. He is the most terrifying of all of the animatronics. Like, arguably, like, some of them, and I'll talk about that later on in the video, are kind of scarier, but, like, he's scary in a different way than every other animatronic in the franchise, which isn't... The rest of them are robots, and they're strictly haunted robots, but Springtrap is a dude, and he knows how to kill you. The other ones are trying to get to you to kill you, but, like, he's a professional. He's been doing this since 1985. Like, this man is a pro, and he knows how to get to you. He knows how to crawl through the vents. He knows how to abuse everything in the restaurant to get to you as easily as possible and to kill you. And it creates this overwhelming sense of dread. Because, again, Five Nights at Freddy's 1, I described it as claustrophobia. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is definitely anxiety. And I would say that Five Nights at Freddy's 3 is... It's like if the worst possible situation happened. It's like when you like, oh, this can't get any worse, and then something worse happens. That's how the later nights in FNaF. And as I said, I described Five Nights at Freddy's 1 as claustrophobia and Five Nights at Freddy's 2 as anxiety, but Five Nights at Freddy's 3 is terror. Five Nights at Freddy's 3 is the feeling that you are being hunted, and of course, this is exemplified when you find out the story of Springtrap, when you figure out he is the purple guy, when you're shown that he is this monster trying to kill you, a true creature of the dark, a murderer, a legitimate terror, because it doesn't only give you the feeling of this rabbit thing from a video game trying to hunt your character down. It's this really odd feeling of this. It makes you feel like you're genuinely being hunted by a monster in the sense of he's a child murderer. He killed like 6 kids. He's a terrible dude. It does not help all of the other 50 million things that are trying to obscure you at that moment. It makes everything so much worse. Now, of course, let's hear what my friends think about Five Nights at Freddy's 3. So, after too much deliberation, finally we move on to Five Nights at Freddy's 3. So...
Watermelon.
Isn't this one with the nightmare people?
No.
Oh.
Five Nights at Freddy's 3. So, in Five Nights at Freddy's 3, you play as a night guard of unspecified identity at the time.
Really? He plays a night guard?
You have to stop an animatronic known as Springtrap from coming and killing you. Later through the minigames, you learn that Springtrap is later in the game, you learn that Springtrap is the purple guy, the guy who killed the kids. At some point after FNaF 2, but before FNaF 1, basically we learn that old Willy Boy had some issues with the animatronics, right? And they do get quirky, and their special quirk was trying to find him, and they couldn't enter the secret room as they are not programmed to be able to do so. So they try to get in the room, right? And then William Afton tears them apart, right? Which comes to his detriment about 5 nights later when they all summon in front of him and they chase him down, at which point he gets in his trusty old spring suit, which basically, so the way spring locks work is that you'll actually see this in a lot of Transformers toys, is they lock in place with a spring, and then through, you know, being pressed more, they'll undo. And the issue with these things, though, is that they fail when they get moist, right? So old Willy boy, he's real sweaty, he's in a damp place, right? You know, he's breathing pretty heavy. So all of the spring locks just tend to go off at that point and murder his poor husk of a human body. And then he doesn't die. He won't die. He always comes back. But his bloody corpse just lies there as he gasps for life. And eventually, they find him, bring him to the FNaF 3 location. Then actually...
Is his bloody corpse hot?
No. So, timeline time. Any questions before we go on to the timeline?
How the hell is FNaF 2 before FNaF 1?
It's a prequel.
No, but like, because I thought the whole point was that in FNaF 2, a new location was opening.
Yeah, there was a Freddy's location before that.
Oh, okay. Then I'm all good.
Riley, when restaurants have multiple locations?
Well, because I thought FNaF 2 was like the new restaurant after the FNaF 1.
Well,
I have a question.
What's
So
your
you know how like Withered Bonnie has no fucking faceplate? Where did that go?
they got rid of it.
But like, why?
Basically, what they were going to do is they were going to use parts from the old ones and like take them off and put new parts there, and then use them to, you know, to make them look nicer. But then they just made the FNaF 2 animatronics because it was cheaper to make a new animatronic from scratch that was safer because they had security features to allow them to keep the kids safer. But so they just kind of threw what was left of the FNaF, the withered animatronics, in the parts and services room.
That was stupid of them. You just made them more mad at you.
Alright, so now we have the final timeline. Any last questions about the FNaF 3 lore before we continue?
No.
Alright, so this is taking me like a legit hour, so like, subscribe, and everything like that, and we'll get into the timeline. Sometime in 1985, the first Freddy's location opens. It's the one from the first game, but it's not from the same time, and the spring lock suit technology exists around this point, as well as around this time in 1985, the missing children incident occurring, with Purple Guy killing at least 5 to 6 kids. This original location is shut down because of it, and later in 1987, a new Freddy's location opens, and FNaF 2 ensues with the Bite of 87 happening sometime during or after Night 5. And the location is shut down by a mix of this and the missing children's incident being reignited after they find the kids' corpses in the withered animatronic suits. Later in the year 2003, Phone Guy is killed while recording your Night 4 phone call, and later the gameplay of FNaF 1 takes place. However, the FNaF 1 location is shut down, either from being non-profitable, or just because of the murders once again causing the downfall of the business. After their building begins decomposing, Purple Guy returns to the FNaF 1 location and dismantles the animatronics because he's afraid of the robots who are hunted by his victims, and uses one of the off-map rooms to hide and destroy the animatronics. Later, the souls of the children crowd around him, and he runs into his old murder mech, the Spring Bonnie suit. And from the moist building, his sweat, and his heavy breathing, the spring locks activate, and they go off and he dies. Later on, Fazbear Entertainment reignites the brand with a horror attraction based on the fear the locations had caused. On night 2, they find one, a real one. They find the corpse of the Purple Guy in the spring lock suit now dubbed Springtrap, and the events of FNaF 3 continue to occur with the children's souls being set free aside from the puppet, and the FNaF 3 location burning up in flames. Springtrap presumably dies here, but any intellectual will be able to notice he's still alive. He's in the photo on the newspaper. He won't die. He always comes back. Dear God, that was like the 500th take. Y'all better enjoy this video. I swear to God, I wanted to do it all in one take, and I did it. So there you go. Like, subscribe, hit the gosh diddly damn bell. FNaF 3 was meant to be the ending of the franchise, but a lot of people didn't find the jump scares satisfactory. People didn't really find the game as scary as intended, and Scott wanted to solve this with the next game, Five Nights at Freddy's 4. the main reason that he did this was to solve the issue of the fear, and he did this by making the animatronics look like straight out of a damn It movie. They're terrifying. Not in the same way as Springtrap, but in a way, they're horrifying. FNaF 4 really exudes the feeling of being a kid at like 3 a.m., you woke up, you're scared there's a monster under your bed, all of these things are happening. It really makes you feel like you're 5 again. It's terrified, your parents aren't home or whatever, or they are, or you're being babysat, whatever the case, you're scared something is going to kill you. For no good reason, because you're like 5, but regardless. And I described FNaF 1 as claustrophobia, FNaF 2 as anxiety, FNaF 3 as terror, and I would describe FNaF 4 as dread. Just pure dread, because it's not terribly hard to deal with the animatronics. As long as you listen well enough, it is, but dealing with them while absolutely dreading what happens is the reason that gets you up. There's this one video, I'll link it in the description and the iCard. Basically, it talks about why FNaF 4 is scary, and it describes how, basically, it makes you feel scared that you're once again going to get jump scared. I mean, FNaF 1 is the only game where people get jump scared on the first night. To really be good at FNaF 4, you have to face your fears, which feels like almost like the point of the game. You have to push yourself as much as humanly possible. You have to push your fear. You have to push past it to be good at the game, which ironically feels like how you would be as a child in these situations. You would have to push past your fear to survive. With FNaF 4, I want to take a different approach than the prior things, and this may continue into the next entries in this video, but I just want to talk about the story of FNaF 4, because the story of this game being unsatisfactory is the reason that the next game of the franchise got made, Sister Location. Sister Location got made because people didn't find the lore in this game satisfactory, for a multitude of reasons, and I think the center of that reason stems from the main issue of this game's story. It's not the Bite of 87. It was teased to be the Bite of 87 in every teaser, and like at last minute or something, Scott decided it's the Bite of 83 now. It's obvious. In every teaser, it had the letters 87 in it. 87, 87, every teaser. It was teased as, was it me or me? Did I do the bite? It was me. It was all about who did the Bite of 87. It was the final mystery in the franchise, but FNaF 5 Nights at Freddy's 4 retconned it to be the Bite of 83 before release. So it's the Bite of 83, right? Whatever. But then that means that the Bite of 87 happens in FNaF 2, which, I'm sorry, but would it not be more satisfactory of an ending? Because this was also supposed to be the ending of the franchise again. A more literal ending of the franchise, if anything. But to show the Bite of 87. Now, granted, FNaF 6 is the most satisfactory ending we could have gotten, and I wouldn't change the way things went for the world, but I definitely feel like the biggest thing that could have made this game's story better is if it had been the Bite of 87. I mean, my friends can attest, I hate that this isn't the Bite of 87. If it was the Bite of 87, the timeline would be so much more compact. There wouldn't be Fred Bears. Like, Fred Bears could have been a thing, but like, all of this just, it needs to be, like, if it was simplified, it would be so much easier. And granted, there's probably some reason why it was the Bite of 83 and not 87, but I'm sure that eventually that'll be confirmed, or maybe still will retcon it or something, but I don't know. Regardless, it should have been the Bite of 80. And with the next entry, I just want to talk about why I love this game. I'll talk about the more normal stuff afterward, but I want to describe why Sister Location is my personal favorite in the franchise. It may not be the best, but I think it's the best in my opinion. It is my favorite. Now, this is for a multitude of reasons. First, I'm going to address my bias for it. After 5 Nights at Freddy's 4, I just assumed that was the end of the franchise, and I didn't get back into it. I didn't know it was a thing for like a year. But then, right, I heard about Sister Location, and I watched the Markiplier videos, because of course it was the Markiplier videos, and I loved the game. I loved every aspect of it. It was a departure from everything the franchise had done before. It was the perfect thing the franchise needed to keep it fresh. It was the perfect, it was like a weird mix of sci-fi and horror. I mean, it was arguably the darkest game up to that point, aside from maybe the Bite of 83 and FNaF 4, because that's brutal. I mean, FNaF 3 also has the death of Purple Guy, but Sister Location introduces a lot. I feel like a lot of people say that the timeline is convoluted and there's so many things, and that's because I feel like when a lot of people, now granted I'm doing the same thing in this video, try to describe it, it's like people try to describe it with every minute detail, and when somebody who's passionate about the franchise starts talking about it, they describe the timeline with every intricate detail and how the franchise found it out, because if I had to explain how we knew all of this video would be like an extra hour long. But this location makes it a bit more simple by, instead of strictly adding to the lore, now granted, this game's event are a big thing in the timeline, but this location also makes it so that it's not as terrible, because the main focus of the story is the characters, and not the time. Because in every other game, a big point of the thing is, well, when does it take place? And granted, this does have it too, but the biggest focus of this game is the characters, and who they are, and what their purpose is, and how they do this, and that, and this, and that, and this, and that. And the main focus being William Afton, the identity of the purple guy. And I'll get into that in the timeline, and then I'll talk about it a little more after. And I skipped the FNaF 4 part of this really quickly, just so I could explain why I love Sister Location, and then I can combine 4 and 5 into the timeline at around the same time, because they're nowhere near close, and I feel like it'll work, you know, it just works. Now, of course, with every other game in the franchise, I give it a describing word: claustrophobia, anxiety, terror, dread. But I feel like Sister Location exemplifies melancholy. Something feels wrong, but you don't know what it is. Obviously, you know that, you know, you're going to die and there's animatronics that are going to kill you, but it's just something so off about it. It feels so overwhelmingly corporate and kid-friendly. It feels both adult and childlike at the same time, and it feels odd in a way. It feels like everything is wrong, but there's no reason for it to be. It is an odd feeling playing Sister Location, especially the fact that it takes smaller elements from all the prior things, mainly in the custom night, which takes the claustrophobia from FNaF 1 and takes the tons of animatronics anxiety from FNaF 2, but also it takes the terror and the dread from FNaF 3 and 4, because you're dreading these animatronics, because you can play this game, and as long as you play very carefully, like with FNaF 4, you have to play very carefully not to die, right? And similar to the 20 modes of prior games, it also has that, but it has the dread feeling, because you know if you take that extra step and you do it wrong, or you press the button for too long, or you don't do this, or you don't do that, you're going to die. And it's dreadful and terrible. But the terror of these animatronics is exemplified when you realize that they are made to kill. Because you're going to probably learn this before the custom night even, but they are designed to kill. Kill children, sure, but they're murder machines nonetheless. I don't doubt that they could kill adults, and you get that vibe too. They're terrifying because of everything, and it takes all these elements in smaller doses. Everything prior was more focused, but Sister Location specifically has this melancholy vibe that fills every part of the atmosphere, aside from a bit of the custom night, I'd feel. Like, the custom night feels a bit more like challenge, but it still has the elements of all of the other parts of the franchise. I'd say that the custom night of Sister Location has the claustrophobia, anxiety, terror, and dread a bit more than the other parts of the game, but it has a lot less of the melancholy, which is a good vibe for a more traditional FNaF-style game. But we're going to talk about why the melancholiness of the franchise is so important with FNaF 6. But real quick, next up's the timeline. I have to do it again. Woo! Alright, so I'm going to keep everything way more brief, because I've already explained a lot of this stuff. But, so the earliest point in the timeline we know of is Elizabeth, William Afton's daughter, dying. Later on, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 happens in 1983, the spring lock technology exists, and later, obviously, the Bite of 83 happens. Later in the timeline, in 1985, the Missing Children incident occurs, and this is obviously not too great for the business, So it causes the Freddy's location to shut down. Freddy's location probably already being shut down at this point. Later, in sister location, the sister location events happen, right? Michael goes down, he gets scooped, that's great. Later, FNaF 2 happens in 1987, with your character dying to the bite of 87 on night 5, or the next morning at the day shift. Then, after that, Michael actually comes in the next night and is fired for odor and not supposed to be there, and he tampered with the animatronics. Not too great of an employee Mike is. Later, FNaF 1 happens, then Purple Guy causes himself to get spring-trapped, and then, after that point, FNaF 3 happens. And that's our timeline so far. Don't worry, the last timeline I'll say in this video will be the longest with the most information. I just want to keep this one a bit more brief because there's so much of the video left to explain, and I just want to keep you caught up with how everything falls into place so that the next time you won't be too shocked. I'm going to do what everyone else does, and I'm not going to pretend to shock you with this information. I'm just going to be blunt. It was a really planned out ruse that got pulled and made everyone think it's just some fancy pizzeria simulator, and it was actually FNaF 6. FNaF 6 has 3 main gameplay structures, one being the salvage mechanic, which is the last thing you do, and I'm going to go backwards with this just because of how important it is. The salvage mechanic is unbelievably important because it allows you to bring these things into your pizzeria willingly, and they'll find a way in regardless, probably. Like, there's no doubt about it, but it is, like, so scary because you're up close and personal with these animatronics, and you have to do everything very precisely, so it gives you that dread feeling. And then obviously there's the night stuff, which those animatronics that you salvage appear in to hunt you down. You see, this has the claustrophobia and later on anxiety elements, because it completely gets rid of the camera system, and you have no way of knowing where they are without using the one thing, and it isn't a time-based system. The first time this happened, like in a more traditional FNaF structure in the franchise, and it's a great way of combining things. And then the day shift segments, which allow you to customize your own pizzeria, which is amazing, and you're about to see that in a minute, but I just wanted to, like, bring up how incredible it is to, like, build your own pizzeria and be your own entrepreneur and make your own Freddy's. I feel like a game where you just have access to every animatronic and there's money and it's like a massive catalog of stuff you can buy just to build your own Freddy's. I feel like a massive game like that would be so fun. Like, I want to own my own Freddy's. I want to choose my animatronics. I want to do this and that and this and that and this and that and this and that. Like, it is so fun just to screw stuff around. You're about to see my amazing pizzeria in a minute, but like this game incorporates everything. It incorporates the claustrophobia of and night shift segments where you're fuck. I'm not even gonna cut here. I'm just gonna keep going. Where you're cut off from society and you're claustrophobic and you're in a small space, and it also gives you that anxiety because you have no way of knowing where they are and you have to be really anxious and you have to pay a lot of attention. And the salvage segments give you a lot of terror because you're scared of what's gonna happen, and you know you're face to face with these animatronics right there. These are all murderers, right? Like, it's murderers and then Lefty. That is the only 2 categories here, and even then Lefty can still jump scare you at this point, right? Then there is the Dread from FNaF 4, which actually ironically takes place during the day shift segments because you are dreading having to press that button and go on to the night segments because you were just having fun playing all these games and stuff, and the whole time you're thinking about how you're about to have to go to one of the most stressful things in FNaF history. And then there's the almost melancholy feeling, also presented by the day shift, which I feel like FNaF's location having more wrong with it definitely has more of the melancholy, but of course the day shift has this too, especially with Lefty, but I'm not going to talk about that until after I show off my pizzeria. But basically, it gives you this odd feeling that you know something's wrong. You know that you're going to have to go to the night shift and be terrified, but the day shift is so nice, and it's this odd melancholy feeling, which is why I feel like you can't categorize FNaF 6 well, because there's so much going on, and it is undisputably the best ending this franchise could have had. It is the ending to the original 6 games, and I don't know if anything will ever be able to top this feeling that it gives off. So instead of explaining the pizzeria segment, I kind of just wanted to give you guys a tour of my pizzeria. I could do a little bit of explaining about the general mode while showing, but I just kind of want to show off what I did. Well, obviously I completed every ending, and then I was like, you know what, I want to try to get the best pizzeria I can, and I think I did pretty damn well. So we can enter, and then we'll continue and not have a new game. And so then we can take a look at my animatronics, because that's the first thing you see. So I have, obviously, Foxy's over on his own over here, his own little Pirate's Cove, you know, because FNaF 1, Pirate's Cove, even, so, like, pretty much every game, Foxy has a cove, right, and I want to emulate that with this, you know. Then over here, I have Rockstar Bonnie, Rockstar Freddy, and Rockstar Chica in that order, because that's always how they are on the stage. Bonnie's always to Freddy's right, like, if you were looking outside of Freddy, like, Bonnie would be on your right, like the one minigame in, well, is it a minigame? I guess you kind of just move your cursor, but, like, when you open FNaF 2 for the first time, Bonnie's on your right, Chica's on your left. That's how the stage is centered. And I put Lefty here because, obviously, I wanted it to kind of be like, oh, it's the band, and then Foxy, but Lefty's kind of just his own thing, so I put Lefty over there. Over here, I have Fruity Maze on the right, because it's closer to Chica, and then I have Midnight Motorist over here to kind of symmetrically, symmetrize, that's not a word, to make the restaurant more symmetrical. Over here, I also put some balloons for Balloon Boy, just because I felt like it fit with the other stuff I put here, such as Candy Cadet, and I put Candy Cadet over here because this is kind of like the important stuff side on accident. And I put the security puppet over here specifically by the door because of how the minigame works, and also just because it's for security, and like in the minigame it would be best for the door. Also because I feel like it's perfectly fitting to have it near the purple guy minigame. Then there's the jar of pickles there, which you can't move, and then there is the egg baby thing. I thought it was big, big enough to go by the door. It kind of is similar to security, so I thought I'd put it parallel to the puppet. Then I have Golden Guy here to parallel the Candy Cadet, similar size thing, again. Then there's the ball pit. Oh, the beloved ball pit. I mean, the first thing most people think of when they think of this game is, like, how Helpy just absolutely snaps his neck. It's like the first thing you're gonna do, probably, like, snap Helpy's neck in the original ball pit. So, I thought I'd do that. So, yeah, this is my pizzeria. I just kind of wanted to show this off, not gonna lie. Like, I spent so long trying to get it this perfect. I mean, look at that score in the top right. Like, I have a pretty damn good score, if I do say so myself, I mean, like, I have everything maxed out as much as possible. I mean, like, the only reason my health and safety is probably so high is because I invested in this little nurse station or whatever in the top right. I like how the paper pals are. I like how everything is, and it's a giant love letter to FNaF. I mean, I feel like this is a staple of this game, specifically because everyone wants to create their own FNaF restaurant. It's one of the reasons I love Day Shift at Freddy's 3 so much, which I might even talk about in its own video maybe one day. But like, I just love the idea of owning my own Freddy's. That's such a cool idea, But anyway, back to the video proper, I guess. And this game ends with one of the most impactful and important things ever said in this franchise. Up to this point, there weren't a lot of voice lines, mostly being in sister location, but the amount of impact that the speech has, I'll just let it play after this, but the amount of impact and emotion that it exudes is so important to the franchise. I mean, my friend, Riley, who recently got into it, he's in this video, but he recently got into the franchise, and he as a new fan, adores this speech. It is because he watched so many things about it, and he understands this. He understands it was this long journey, and he understands why this speech is so important. It marks the ending. I mean, when I heard this speech for the first time, I got emotional because it is the ending of this thing that I have lived with for so long. And granted, it was just the end of the original series, and now Scott's left the franchise and everything, but like the feeling that it exudes, I've said that a lot within like the past hour or two, but you understand, right? Comment to tell me, but like legitimately, it is unbelievably well written, and it is so amazing, and I will let that be said now.
Connection terminated. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth, if you still even remember that name, but I'm afraid you've been misinformed. You are not here to receive a gift, nor have you been called here by the individual you assume, although you have indeed been called. You have all been called here, into a labyrinth of sounds and smells, misdirection, and misfortune. A labyrinth with no exit, a maze with no prize. You don't even realize that you are trapped. Your lust for blood has driven you in endless circles, chasing the cries of children in some unseen chamber, always seeming so near, yet somehow out of reach. But you will never find them. None of you will. This is where your story ends. And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be. I am remaining as well. I am nearby. This place will not be remembered, and the memory of everything that started this can finally begin to fade away, as the agony of every tragedy should. And to you monsters trapped in the corridors, be still, and give up your spirits. They don't belong to you. For most of you, I believe there is peace, and perhaps more, waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole. So don't keep the devil waiting, friend. My daughter, if you can hear me, I knew you would return as well. It's in your nature to protect the innocent. I'm sorry that on that day, the day you were shut out and left to die, no one was there to lift you up into their arms, the way you lifted others into yours. And then, what became of you? I should have known you wouldn't be content to disappear. Not my daughter. I couldn't save you then, so let me save you now. It's time to rest, for you, and for those you have carried in your arms. This ends, for all of us, in communication.
And this game ends with one of the most impactful and important things ever said in this franchise. Up to this point, there weren't a lot of voice lines, mostly being in sister location, but the amount of impact that the speech has, I'll just let it play after this, but the amount of impact and emotion that it exudes is so important to the franchise. I mean, my friend Riley, who recently got into it, he's in this video, but he recently got into the franchise, and he, as a new fan, adores this speech. It is because he watched so many things about it, and he understands this. He understands it was this long journey, and he understands why this speech is so important. It marks the ending. I mean, when I heard this speech for the first time, I got emotional because it is the ending of this thing that I have lived with for so long. And granted, it was just the end of the original series, and now Scott's left the franchise and everything, but like the feeling that it exudes, I've said that a lot within like the past hour or two, but you understand, right? Comment to tell me, but like legitimately, it is unbelievably well written, and it is so amazing, and I will let that be said now. The earliest point in the timeline is William Neffen's daughter Elizabeth being killed by his murder animatronic circus baby. Later in 1983, FNaF 4 happens with Evan being shoved into Fredbear animatronic's mouth by his older brother Michael. Later in the timeline, the missing children incident occurs in 1985, and at some point after this, sister location happens and Michael Afton gets scooped, and becomes the purple guy who's physically purple, but not the purple guy who kills kids. Like the literal purple guy, not the figurative purple guy. Then the original Freddy's location was shut down around this point, and later in 1987, FNaF 2 location opens. Obviously, FNaF 2 happens, the Missing Children incident shuts that location down, along with the Bite of 87 happening at about the end of Night 5. Then on Night 6, you play as Michael Afton. Later on in the year 2003, Phone Guy is killed while recording your Night 4 phone call, and later the gameplay of FNaF 1 takes place, and you play as Michael Afton once again. After the FNaF 1 location is shut down, either from being non-profitable or because the murderers are once again coming to haunt the business, after the building begins decomposing, Purple Guy returns to the FNaF 1 location and dismantles the animatronics because he's afraid of the robots who are haunted by his victims, and uses one of the map rooms to hide one of the off-map rooms to hide and destroy the animatronics. Later, the souls of the children crowd around him, and he runs to his old murder mech, the Spring Bonnie suit. And from the moist building, his sweat and heavy breathing, the spring locks activate and they go off and he dies. Later on, Fazbear Entertainment reignites the brand with a horror attraction based on the fear of the locations had caused. On Night 2, they find one, a real one. They find Springtrap. He always comes back. Then FNaF 3 happens, all the souls are set free except for Cassidy, the puppet, and Purple Guy, along with every bit of Ennard. Later on, Circus Baby and Ennard get into a fight at some point, and they separate into Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy. Later on, FNaF 6 happens, and then Michael and Henry, not directly together, but kind of working towards the same goal, gather them all to one place and burn the place down, with Henry saying a massive speech. Then, to make sure William Afton never gets rest, Cassidy puts him in an eternal hellscape known as Ultimate Custom Night, forever being tortured by the souls that he killed. And that is the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline up until Ultimate Custom Night. So, after this, all that's really left is the review. Yay! Okay, so welcome to the ranking part of the video. There are 4 categories that I'm going to be basing the ranks on. 1, gameplay, 2, flair/style, 3, levels, and 4 is story. Each category can be ranked on a scale of 1 to 5, so the maximum score that a game can get is a 20, and the lowest obviously would be a 0. So, let's start. So, just to keep it here, so it's in view, for nice reference, FNaF 1. So for gameplay, I give it a 4. It's really solid. It's not the best in the series, and it's not perfectly amazing, but I definitely feel like it isn't the worst. And by gameplay, I purely mean, like, the idea of the gameplay. Like, the mechanics of each animatronic, and the cameras, the lights, the doors, that type of stuff for FNaF 1, for example. Then for flair/style, basically I want to talk about the vibe, right? And FNaF 1 gives you a really powerful claustrophobia vibe, and it really feels like a Chuck E. Cheese sort of place, and I give it a 5 because it's one of the most Chuck E. Cheese, sort of vintage, weird 80s, 90s feeling attractions, in the franchise. And for the levels category, basically, because I'll be using this whenever I do like a video thing like this, but for levels, what I mean specifically for this is how each night will function. Each night is a level in FNaF, right? And I feel like FNaF 1 is pretty good pacing. Night 1, just Chica and Bonnie. They act pretty much the same, but opposite doors. Night 2, Foxy. Night 3, Freddy. I deducted 2 points, however, from this, so 3 out of 5, because I don't necessarily think that Foxy, but more so Freddy, were perfectly communicated, like, in-game. I don't think Phone Guy perfectly, communicated that. Of course, it's enough to where a player can eventually figure it out, but I don't think that's the first thing to, like, oh yeah, I have to do this and this. Foxy is a bit more blatant than Freddy, but, so that gives a total of 15 out of 20, which is a 75 mathematically. So I think leaving it at a little C here is good. Oh yes, wait, I forgot about the story. I give the story a 3. It's pretty bare bones in FNaF 1, so I gave it a 3. But in total, it's 15 out of 20, which is 75. So then FNaF 2, I'm just going to put it here for now. It'll probably move. So, for gameplay, I give it a 5. It is well made. It's definitely an improvement on the FNaF 1 formula, pure mechanic-wise. The anxiety, definitely, like, really good, like, vibes from this. For the flair and style, I give it a 5. It has about the same amount of emphasis on it as FNaF 1, so I felt like it deserved an equal score. For the levels, you see, I gave it a 2. Because it throws so much at you at once, which is definitely part of the vibe, but I definitely feel like Night 2 is the hardest hurdle in this game to get over, and I feel like it shouldn't be. It's the second night. And then for story, I give it a 4. It's not perfect, and there's definitely not a huge emphasis on it, but it's definitely just enough to where, like, oh yeah, this is the story of the game. You could explain it to someone, it would sound great, right? This gives it a 16 out of 20, which is an 80 out of 100. So that's a nice little B, a nice even B. Then FNaF 3. I'll put it next to FNaF 1 just for now, as I did with 2. So, gameplay, I give it a 4. I'd say it's about on par with 1. There is a bit much thrown at you at once, but not nearly as much as FNaF 2. I feel like it's a nice balance. For flair/style, I gave it a 5 like the others. It definitely feels like a horror attraction, you know, like a haunted house sort of thing that people would go to. And also, as I said earlier, you know, the feeling that it is to be chased by a Springtrap, a murderer in a rabbit suit, you know. It's definitely very, you know, scary. Then for levels, I gave it a 1, because I feel like the phantoms are a bit bad. The randomness of Springtrap's movement, DJ Sturf beat the game without doing anything. Like, I feel like the game is a bit too based on randomness, more than the others. Like, in the other games, there's no real way that you can just win without doing anything, and I feel like that's a major flaw with the FNaF 3 game design. And then for story, I give it a 4 like FNaF 2. I'm doing it strict, like no decimals or anything, but if I would, I'd give it a bit more than FNaF 2, probably a 4.5 maybe, but not quite enough to be a 5. I feel like it's very good. It emphasizes the purple guy as a big part of the series, and the endings are they work well. So this gives it a score of 70, which ironically, you know, 14 out of 20, 70. This places it right about here. Right under FNaF 1. Then FNaF 4. Gameplay, 5. The gameplay, really well done, makes you feel like you're a kid in a room. It's really impactful, it makes you feel, it elicits the correct feelings it wants to, and it's really good at it. For the flair/style, again, it feels like you're a little kid running around. It is really effective at that, so I gave it a 4 out of 5, a FNaF 4 out of 5, if you will. For levels, I gave it a 3. It's definitely better than FNaF 2, and about equal to FNaF 1, I'd say, pacing-wise. My only issue is the plush trap. Now, granted, plush trap isn't hard for me, but I can definitely see why a lot of people do have issues with plush trap. Also, I've played the game a lot, but, like, I feel like throwing someone into something so abruptly is a bit much, but again, you know, it works well. It elicits the same feeling, so I didn't want to be too terrible on it. So yeah, and then the story, 5. The cutscenes are amazing. The Bite of 83, it's done well, even though I wish it was 87. It's great. It's definitely, like, very story-filled. It's an effective story. It's easy to understand, but still there's a lot of nuance to it. A lot of stuff that you can reference in future games. Yeah. So that's a total of 17 out of 20, which is an 85, which means it's just above Five Nights 2. And that, you know, that works for me. Then, Sister Location. I love Sister Location. I've made that abundantly clear. Gameplay, I give it a 5. Custom Night's closer to the normal FNaF formula, and I feel like Custom Night and the main gameplay is worth the normalness. I mean, I feel like crawling around the entire pizzeria. Well, it's not really. You get the point though. Like, it's really effective at what it wants to do. For flair and style, gave it a 5. It's just as effective as 1, 2, and 3 at eliciting what it needs out of you. It gives you the correct feelings. It makes you feel. It's, as I said earlier, melancholy. It's weird, and I like it. It definitely fits the franchise, especially up to that point. For levels, I gave it a 3. Because I feel like every night is solid except for 4. Night 4 docked at 2 points because that is the most. Even now, even after the patch, if I was grading it before the patch, then it would definitely be way worse for the score. But I gave it 3 because I can't justify it. It's terrible. I hate Night 4 of Sister Location. It is my only issue with that game. And then for the story, I gave it a 5. It's effective, simple. It's like FNaF 4, right? I'd say it's an equal amount of story to 4. Not too much going on, but it's very good. So that is a total of 18 out of 20. Which is a 90, which is an amazing, beautiful A. And then, for FNaF 6, it has 5s across the board. The gameplay, all great. The flair, amazing. The levels, it is quite possibly one of the best, consistent, level up between every night. Like, every night adds something, and I definitely feel like it's not terrible, you know. It's not as terrible as a lot of stuff, especially not as terrible as I feel FNaF 2 can be at times. It's great though. And then for story, I gave it a perfect 5. It has so much for the people who love the franchise, so many Easter eggs. Other than that though, like, this main story is very simple. And obviously this is a perfect 20 out of 20. Instant A rank. I'd even hesitate. I'm hesitating, but I would give it an S rank if I wanted. But yeah. And then Ultimate Custom Night. Now, I don't feel like Ultimate Custom Night really is a game. It's kind of just an add-on to Pizzeria Simulator. It's like how, you know, Sister Location got that update, and it was originally intended to be an update, and so it's not really a full game. It's the ultimate ending. It's just, it's the cherry on top, you know. It's not another game. It's not another dish. It's a cherry on top of the sundae that is Pizzeria Simulator. Granted, I just decided to give the average of all the other games for this, so 5 for gameplay, 5 for flair and style. 3 for levels, 4 for story, and yeah, honestly, the only thing I would change in that is maybe give it a 5 for story, because it is a lot of story, but it's not really as accessible as the others, so honestly, I feel like this ranking actually is pretty accurate to how I do feel about it, and that's a total of 17 out of 20, which is the same grade as FNaF 4. So I'll kind of just put it here, you know, so it can match up with Pizzeria Simulator up there. Overall though, I love this franchise, and this may or may not be my last video on it. I'm considering doing videos on the Fanverse, maybe the Candy series, you know, something smaller than this, because this was massive. Candies might be a fun one, but this is the end of the video, so like, subscribe, hit the bell and everything, and I'll see you next time, I guess. You know, have fun, have a nice day.